Amara had learned very early in life that love was never free. It always came with a price, a condition, a quiet expectation that she would pay back what was given to her, one way or another. She had grown up watching her father hand affection out like loans, warmly in good times, and recalled sharply the moment things became difficult. She had been 7 years old when her mother passed away, and from that day forward, she understood that she was on her own in the most important ways, even when people were standing right next to her. Her stepmother came 2 years later. The woman was not cruel in the obvious sense. She did not shout or strike. She was something quieter and more lasting than that. She made Amara feel, in small and consistent ways, that she was a burden the family carried, rather than a person the family loved. Meals were smaller on her plate. Opportunities mentioned for the other children were never mentioned for her. When Amara won a school award at 13, her stepmother smiled thinly and said, "Let's hope it continues." It did not feel like encouragement. It felt like a warning. Amara had responded to all of this the way many young women do, when the world teaches them that needing things is dangerous. She became self-sufficient to a degree that was not healthy. She worked through school, paid her own fees, sent money home from her first job even though no one had asked her to, because she believed, somewhere deep and unexamined, that making herself useful was the only reliable way to stay safe. If she was needed, she could not be discarded. That was the logic she lived by, even if she never said it out loud. She had been 23 when her father sat her down in the living room and told her, with his eyes pointed at the floor, that arrangements had been made. A man named Damien Voss had cleared every debt the family carried. The number was significant. In exchange, Amara would go to him. It was framed gently, as a solution, as a practical matter, almost as an opportunity. Her stepmother filled the silence with words like stability and future. Amara sat very still and listened to all of it, and when they were finished, she nodded and excused herself and went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. She had expected, at some point in her life, to be undervalued. She had not quite expected to be assigned a number. She did not cry. Crying had never changed anything in that house. Damien Voss was not what she had imagined. She had built a picture of him in the 3 days between the conversation and her arrival, a picture assembled from fear and assumption. She had imagined someone loud, demanding, someone who wore his power as a performance. She had prepared herself for the worst version of what this could be. The man who was there when she arrived was quiet. He was tall, with a composed and measured way of moving that suggested someone who never did anything without intention. He looked at her directly when she entered, which she was not expecting, and he did not look at her with ownership. He looked at her the way you might look at a situation you are trying to understand. His expression gave nothing away, but it was not unkind. He showed her to her room himself. It was a real room, spacious and private, with a window that looked out over the city. He said the bathroom was hers alone. He said meals were at 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening if she wanted them, but she was free to eat whenever she chose. He said his staff would help her with anything she needed. Then he left. Amara stood in the center of the room and waited for the other part. There was no other part. That evening, she heard him pass in the corridor outside and pause. He knocked, once. She opened the door. He looked at her and asked, without any softness or ceremony, whether she had eaten. She said yes. She had not. 20 minutes later, a plate appeared on the small table outside her door. He was already gone. She stood in the doorway looking at it for a moment. Then she brought it inside and ate every bit of it, sitting on the floor beside her bed, because she had not yet decided the room was hers enough to use the furniture the way she wanted. She did not know what to make of him. She decided, practically, that it did not matter. She would be cautious, she would be polite. She would take up as little space as possible and wait to see what was coming. It was what she always did. The first weeks passed carefully. Amara was good at being invisible. She moved through the house quietly, learned the rhythms of the space, stayed out of the way of his work and his meetings. When they were in the same room, she was composed and pleasant and revealed absolutely nothing. She had a great deal of practice at this, but she was paying attention. She could not help it. She noticed that when he received phone calls he thought might be disruptive, he moved away from wherever she was and took them in his office with the door closed. She noticed the kitchen was stocked differently after the first week. There were specific things there now that she had mentioned once, briefly, in passing, a particular type of tea, a brand of crackers she had said she liked as a child. She told herself it was the staff being thorough. She was not sure she believed that. She noticed that one evening, a business associate of his visited for dinner and spoke to her across the table with a casual dismissiveness. Not rudely, exactly, but in the tone people use when they have already decided someone does not matter. Damien's voice, when he responded to something the man said shortly afterward, dropped to a register she had not heard from him before. Very quiet, very level. The associate adjusted his behavior for the rest of the evening and did not address her that way again. Damien said nothing about it to her. He simply passed the bread and asked her a question about something she had mentioned reading, and the conversation moved on. She noticed that too. The phone call from her father came on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after her arrival. He framed it as concern. He always framed it as concern. There were expenses, he explained. Her stepmother's health, which had apparently become a topic of relevance now that Amara was elsewhere. A shortfall that had arisen unexpectedly. He was not asking, he said. He was simply letting her know. He had said that to her for years. He was simply letting her know. It had always meant the same thing. She told him she would see what she could do. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table and did not move. She was not sad exactly. She was something past sad. That flattened, tired place a person reaches when they have been disappointed by the same source so many times that even the disappointment no longer has any energy in it. She sat there and felt it. Damien found her like that. He came into the kitchen, saw her, and said nothing. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not fill the space with concern or questions. He simply pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and waited. The waiting was what did it. There was something in the complete absence of demand that reached her in a way that nothing careful or kind would have. She started talking. She told him things she had not said to anyone, about the years of it, about the way she had grown up being the solution to problems that were never hers to carry, about the money she had sent home long past the point it was reasonable, about the job she had worked at for 3 years, where a manager had taken everything she produced and put his name on it, and she had stayed anyway, because she had been taught, bone deep, that needing the position was shameful, and so she could not let herself lose it. About the way she had built her identity entirely around being capable and undisruptive and useful, because she had believed for most of her life that was the only version of herself that would be tolerated. Damien listened to all of it without moving, without interrupting, without the expressions people sometimes make when they are preparing their response, rather than actually hearing you. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet. Then he said, "You are not going to send him that money." Not a question. Not a gentle suggestion. A simple, clear statement. Amara looked at him across the table. She searched his face for what he wanted from this. People always wanted something. She could not find it. "He's my father," she said. "That doesn't make the request reasonable," he said. "And it doesn't mean you have to answer it." She did not respond. But she did not send the money either, and in 23 years, that was the first time she had ever not answered that call. She found out what he had done through her cousin, who called on a Sunday, sounding confused and slightly shaken. Apparently, certain conversations had taken place. Her father had received a visit. The nature of it was unclear, but her cousin said that afterward, something seemed to have shifted. The financial threads that had connected Amara to her family's problems for years, threads she had not even fully realized she was still tied to, had been quietly and thoroughly cut. Her name could no longer be used as an asset, a reference, or a source. The man who had taken her work at her former company was, it was being said in professional circles, not quite the person people had thought he was. No one could trace why. Nothing dramatic had happened, but things had changed. She went to find Damien. He was in his office, reading something, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He could tell immediately from her face that she knew. He set down what he was reading and waited. "You did that," she said. "Yes, without telling me. You were not in a position yet to fight any of those battles yourself," he said, "and I was not going to watch things continue that should have been addressed a long time ago. I didn't ask you to." "No," he agreed. You have spent your entire life not asking for things. That does not mean you did not need them. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Something in her chest was doing something complicated. Not anger, though she had walked down the corridor prepared for anger. Something underneath anger. Something that did not have a clean name. You should have told me, she said, but the force had gone out of it. Yes, he said simply. I should have. I will. Next time. She nodded. She stood there a moment longer. Thank you, she said, and immediately felt strange for saying it, and turned and left before she could feel stranger. She went back to her room, sat on the floor beside her bed, because it had become her thinking spot now, and stayed there for a long time, and then she pressed her face into her hands and cried, not from sadness, not exactly, but from the specific and overwhelming experience of being seen, of having someone look at the map of everything that had been done to her, and decide, without asking for credit, to address it. She had not known that was something that could happen to her. What came after was not sudden. It was slow and careful, and often uncertain, which is how real things tend to be. Amara began, in small ways, to let herself exist in the space around her, rather than just occupying its edges. She started a course she had been putting off for 2 years. She called a friend she had slowly disappeared from during the hard seasons, explained nothing except that she was sorry for the distance, and was received with a warmth that surprised her. She started eating meals at the table. She started saying, when asked what she wanted, what she actually wanted. And each time nothing bad happened as a result, she stored it somewhere inside herself like evidence. Damien, for his part, was not a simple man, and did not become one. He was still quiet, still controlled, still someone who did not give himself away easily. But in the evening sometimes, when the day's work was done, they would sit together, at the table, on the roof of the building which had a plain and spectacular view of the city, and he would say things he clearly did not say to most people, about the losses that had made him who he was, about the coldness he had built around himself so deliberately that he had nearly forgotten it was a choice, about the ways her presence in his life had interrupted something in him that had been very settled for a very long time. She listened the way he had listened to her, fully, without rushing to respond. There was an evening, many months on, when they were sitting on the roof and neither of them was speaking, and Amara realized she was not braced. She was not waiting for the other shoe. She was not calculating what this would cost, or what would be asked of her later. She was simply sitting in the dark above a lit city, next to someone who had decided she was worth protecting before she had even asked, and she was present, and she was calm, and she was somewhere she had never quite been before. She did not say any of this. She just sat with it. It was the most extraordinary feeling she had ever had. A non-profit reached out to her the following spring, an organization that worked with young women in situations of economic vulnerability and family pressure. They had heard about her through connections she could not fully trace, and they wanted her to come and speak. She almost said no. The reflex was still there, making herself visible, taking up space in a room, asking people to look at her story. All of it felt strange, and slightly dangerous, in a way she recognized as old and not accurate. She said yes. The evening of the event, she stood backstage and listened to the room filling. Damien had driven her. He had said almost nothing on the way, which was normal, but at the door of the venue he had looked at her once, steadily, the way he always did when he was saying something without words. She had nodded. She had gone inside. When she walked out in front of the room, she saw faces she recognized, in the way you recognize something without knowing it. Women carrying a familiar kind of tiredness, a familiar kind of careful self-containment. Women who had been told, in different languages and different settings, that they were worth less than they were. She began to speak, not about being saved, not about being rescued. She spoke about what it had taken to believe that her own life belonged to her. She spoke about the long and non-linear process of learning to receive care without waiting for it to be taken away. She spoke about the difference between surviving and actually, genuinely, living. The room was very quiet, in the way rooms are, when people are listening with their whole bodies. Damien was in the back. She could see him from where she stood. He was not watching her the way someone watches something that belongs to them. He was watching her the way someone watches something they are proud to have been near, with a kind of still and private satisfaction that had nothing to do with credit. She had once been handed to a man like a thing with a number attached to it. She stood in that room, speaking her own words in her own voice, and she was nobody's transaction, and nobody's solution, and nobody's debt. She was just herself. And that, in the end, was the whole story.